In this lesson, I want to show you an alternative argument that we can pass to the setState method to update component state. So far, all that we've passed has been a plain JavaScript object with the properties on the state that we want to update. So here is an example on line 14. Another thing that we can pass to setState is a function that returns that very same object. So a function that returns an object specifying the properties on state that should be updated. So just to show you how the syntax works, I'm going to replace line 14 here with our new implementation, and it's going to look like this. I'm going to comment this out, and I'm still going to write setState, but as I mentioned, instead of providing an object, I'm going to provide a function that returns an object. And when we use an arrow function, if we do this syntax right here, the curly braces will be interpreted as part of the function body. But since I want this function to return an object, what I can do is wrap this in parentheses, and that will indicate that the function is returning an object with these specified properties. And of course, the property I want to put in here is login mode. And just to emulate the thing I have above, I'm just going to make that equal to checked. And so now we have the setup where instead of an object, we are passing in a function that returns an object. I just want to show you that the app works the exact same way. You can see everything is still working as I toggle between my two form modes. Now, when it comes to the current situation we have here, there is no advantage to using this approach on line 15. So you always want to go with line 14 in a situation like this. What I mean by a situation like this is whenever you are setting a state property and the value that you are giving it is new or original or kind of coming into existence at that point, the simplest syntax is to use the object syntax like we have on line 14, and that is the way to go. The situation where you might want to use the function syntax is when you are calculating the next state based on the current state. So if you're going to be using an existing state property and then using that to derive or arrive at a follow-up state property, in those situations, it is advantageous to use the function syntax, all right? So let me show you again a couple different ways we can think about a new problem, and that will kind of give us the best example as to when we would use the function syntax. So let's say we go back to the original implementation we had in this component, and rather than taking a Boolean property from our switch component, the checked value here, let's say instead what we're going to do is simply invert or reverse the value of the login mode property whenever this method is called. So if login mode is true, we're going to set it to false. And if login mode is false, we're going to set it to true. So we're going to take the state as it currently is. We're going to take the login mode property as it is, and we're going to flip it. So that is an example of using existing state to arrive at the next state. So here, I'm just going to remove this property or this parameter because we no longer need it. Let me now reverse my comments so we go back to our original mode. In a situation like this, we would need the current value of our login mode state property to invert it. So that code would look something like this. I could say const current value is going to be this.state.login mode. So I'm going to take whatever is the current Boolean, and then right here, I'm going to invert it like so. I'm going to take that constant, I'm going to put the exclamation point in front of that Boolean to take the inverse. So flip it to the other Boolean. And if I wanted to consolidate this onto a single line, that code would look like this, right? It is precisely in these types of situations that we have on line 14, where we are using existing state to calculate the next state. It is precisely in this kind of situation that the React team advises to use the solution on line number 15 instead. So let me show you what that solution is going to look like. In the solution on line number 15, we can get rid of check right here. Rather than referencing this.state or anything like that, we're going to have access to the current state via the first parameter to this arrow function. So the function that we provide to the setState method, React will automatically give the current value of the state as the very first parameter. This is the value of the state as it is, but momentarily it will become our previous state because we're about to update it with the changes we specify right here. So a very common parameter you'll see here for the name is going to be something like prev state. The parameter name is up to us, but this represents the previous state, or kind of the state as it is right now, as it's about to be changed. So this is sort of what the situation is right now. So in order to figure out the next value for login mode, we can take prev state, that is our entire state object, we can take the login mode property on it, and of course that is what it currently is. We want to flip it like so with the exclamation point, and this is the code that we write. So now we don't need to reference this.state, we can simply get previous state and use that as the basis for arriving at the next value for the login mode property. So first up, let me delete this comment, save this, and show you that everything still works. You can see this approach works. So we can provide a function that returns an object with the next state, or more specifically, an object with the properties of the state that we want to update. But again, this approach is recommended whenever you have a situation where you are relying on the current state to generate or derive the next state. Now, why is this approach recommended? Generally because it's going to be less prone to error. So the React documentation states that state updates in React may be asynchronous. So what that means is, as JavaScript runs through the code, as we run through line number 14, that is not necessarily going to be the moment in time when React decides to update the state and thus re-render the component. What React may actually do behind the scenes is it may batch or collect multiple setState calls into one and then make those changes all at once. And the reason React does this is for efficiency reasons. We don't need to really worry about React's algorithm under the hood. The important takeaway, however, is that this line is not guaranteed to run exactly as it is right here on line 14 when JavaScript processes the code. It basically enters this kind of queue in React, and React says, okay, I'll take care of this in a few moments, right? Now, from our perspective as a user, that update may be immediate on the screen, and it may certainly look instantaneous to us, but it is not technically instantaneous under the hood. React may do other operations before it updates the state and before it renders to the screen. And thus, the value of this.state may actually change over that time and may become sort of out of date, which introduces this whole category of errors, right? So basically what the React development team recommends is you should not rely on this.state for determining the next state of the component. So whenever you're using a syntax like this, or in general, even if you're using an object here to pass into to setState, you never want to rely on this.state to arrive at the next property. It's precisely for those situations where we need to derive the next state from the current state that we employ this strategy. We pass in a function, that's number one. Number two, we make the function accept a single parameter, which represents the state as it currently is. And then, step number three, we make that function return an object representing the same idea, the properties that we want to update on the component state, but we can now utilize the previous state, or kind of the component state as it's starting the execution of this function, and use those properties to update the next state that the component is going to have. And what is the benefit of using a function is React is going to hold on to this function, and when it's actually going to make that state update, that's when it's going to execute this logic, and thus it's always going to have the most up-to-date value of the current state in order to be able to arrive at the next state. So you're basically going to avoid that class of bugs that we talked about where the state may get a little bit out of sync and we may not get the right update value. All right, it's kind of an old school use case, and you may not even necessarily see this problem in your own code. It's just something important to remember, right? So when you are updating state based on existing state, the React team recommends passing in a function rather than a plain object to the setState method. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.